My name is Anderson Cooper. Tonight, we peel back the layers of headlines to reveal the forces shaping our world in ways most of us never see. Imagine this. Last week, the U.S. quietly announced tariffs on Greenland's rare earth exports, a move barely mentioned outside specialized trade bulletins. To the casual observer, it was just another bureaucratic maneuver. But beneath that surface lies a tectonic clash between global economic control and national security priorities, a clash that echoes in Washington boardrooms and in the corridors of Beijing, far from public view. At the same time, talks over Ukraine have reached a delicate, almost imperceptible turning point. The media present a narrative of stalled negotiations, a stalemate frozen in time. Yet behind closed doors, unprecedented legal frameworks and financial guarantees are quietly shifting the balance of power, revealing a strategic chessboard where every decision carries consequences far beyond Kiev. And as if this were not enough, tensions in the Middle East are simmering to a degree that threatens global energy markets and, ultimately, the cost of living for the average American. Tonight, we are not just following stories. We are tracing the invisible currents beneath them. These are not mere numbers or political posturing. This is about stability versus volatility, influence versus independence, the delicate balance between institutions and markets. And more importantly, it is about understanding how these high-stakes maneuvers, Greenland tariffs, Ukraine diplomacy, Middle East crises, trickle down to affect your paycheck, your job security, and your family's future. In the next several minutes, we will explore who truly holds the cards, which unexpected actors are changing the game, and what citizens like you have the right to demand in terms of transparency and accountability. This is a story of power, strategy, and the very real consequences that reach all the way to Main Street. The story begins decades ago, long before tariffs became a headline, when Greenland's vast mineral wealth was quietly mapped by foreign corporations and national agencies alike. Rare earth elements, critical for everything from smartphones to advanced military systems, were extracted on paper but never truly factored into global strategy, hidden behind a veil of obscurity that made them seem irrelevant to everyday life. For years, politicians and analysts dismissed Greenland as a distant, frozen expanse, a curiosity rather than a fulcrum of power. Why did no one pay attention until now? Perhaps because acknowledging it meant confronting uncomfortable truths about dependency, about how fragile supply chains had quietly left entire industries vulnerable. The perception of inevitability had taken root. Greenland's resources were there, untapped, waiting, while the world carried on as if nothing mattered. Then came the mechanics of control, the legal scaffolding that allowed this flashpoint to emerge. Tariffs are not simply taxes. They are precise instruments, a lever wielded under the guise of trade law, designed to redirect the flow of capital, constrain foreign access, and create bargaining power without firing a single shot. The U.S. imposed restrictions using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, quietly monitoring exports and mandating licenses for every shipment of rare earths leaving Greenland's ports. Behind the curtain, multinational corporations scrambled to secure stockpiles, financial flows shifted from offshore accounts into controlled warehouses, and lobbying campaigns intensified, all calibrated to ensure influence over a resource that underpins the electronics powering modern life. Few understand the choreography, but it is deliberate, meticulous, and ruthless. In this arena, the winners are clear. Corporations that already command logistics networks, traders who manipulate futures, and governments capable of enforcing compliance with surgical precision. The losers, however, are less visible. Small manufacturers relying on stable prices, technicians whose work depends on consistent supply, and citizens who eventually pay the bill as costs rise quietly in supermarkets and hardware stores. How fair is it that power is concentrated in the hands of those who see resources as leverage, while those who rely on them suffer silently? And yet, obstacles abound. Greenland itself resists being a pawn. Indigenous rights groups, environmental concerns, and potential Chinese investment create variables that can derail even the most calculated U.S. strategies. Every decision carries risk, and one misstep could send markets into disarray. On a human scale, imagine a family paying for a new electric car or a factory adjusting its production because the price of a magnet has spiked overnight. These abstract tariffs translate directly into real hardship. Globally, The implications are staggering. Asia watches closely, Europe recalibrates industrial strategy, and even Africa's emerging tech sectors feel the ripple. What begins in a remote Arctic outpost cascades across the globe, influencing supply chains, trade agreements, and geopolitical alliances. It is a vivid reminder that local decisions are never isolated. The moral, however, is not found in economic advantage or political maneuvering. It is found in governance. Citizens deserve transparency, foresight, and accountability from those who wield such disproportionate power. They deserve leaders who prioritize stability, equity, and the common good, rather than hidden leverage that enriches a few at the expense of the many. In the cold expanse of Greenland, the choices made today will echo for generations. It is a test of strategy, yes, but above all, a test of conscience. The negotiations over Ukraine are often portrayed in headlines as stalled, a frozen stalemate between East and West, a gridlock of diplomats and generals exchanging words without movement. But beneath this surface, the story is far more intricate, far more consequential. The roots of this crisis stretch back decades to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fragile architecture of security in Eastern Europe. For years, these tensions were ignored or dismissed as distant geopolitical theater. Few questioned why the promise of stability in Ukraine never fully materialized, why agreements were signed yet borders remained contested. It created a sense of inevitability, a slow march toward a confrontation that, for ordinary citizens, seemed abstract but was always on the horizon. The mechanics of the current talks are deceptively complex. They involve not just diplomatic dialogue, but legal instruments that bind international financing, military assistance packages with precise delivery schedules, and the covert movement of intelligence to shape negotiation leverage. Every clause in these agreements, whether about security guarantees, humanitarian corridors, or sanctions enforcement, functions as a lever capable of reshaping the balance of power. The implementation is monitored by multiple agencies, from the State Department to NATO command centers, ensuring compliance while providing tactical advantage to those who can act decisively. This is not abstract bureaucracy. It is strategy in motion, executed with surgical precision. In this conflict, the winners are states and institutions capable of maneuvering through complex legal and financial networks, those who can exploit loopholes and align multilateral support to strengthen their position. The losers are those who cannot. Citizens trapped in frontline cities, small businesses disrupted by economic uncertainty, families whose futures are mortgaged by inflation triggered by sanctions and energy price spikes. How much should ordinary people bear the cost of strategic chess played by global powers? Yet, there are obstacles that threaten to upend the delicate balance. Unexpected political shifts in Kiev, the influence of external actors with competing agendas, and the potential for miscalculations in military or economic enforcement could derail months of painstaking negotiation. Every misstep risks not just stalled talks, but escalation, a reminder that stability is always fragile. On a personal level, consider a factory worker in a U.S. industrial town facing higher energy bills because natural gas prices spike in response to sanctions, or a Ukrainian teacher worried about basic security for her students while the world debates abstract points on maps. These human realities are inseparable from strategic maneuvers. The ripple effects are global. European economies adjust supply chains to circumvent disruptions, Asian markets hedge against currency volatility, and emerging nations recalibrate their foreign policy to avoid entanglement. What seems a regional conflict in the headlines is, in reality, a force reshaping global order with consequences that extend into every corner of the world. At its core, the lesson is moral as much as it is strategic. Citizens deserve clarity, foresight, and accountability from their leaders, who must balance security with humanity. The responsibility of governance is not only to protect national interests, but to safeguard the lives and livelihoods of those who ultimately live under their decisions. Ukraine is more than a map. It is a test of whether power can coexist with conscience. The Middle East has always been a landscape where history, religion, and resources collide. Yet the current surge in tensions is often oversimplified in headlines as another cycle of conflict. The truth is far more layered, rooted in decades of agreements ignored, alliances shifted, and unspoken rivalries that have quietly dictated regional stability. For years, Global media frame the region as perpetually unstable, a place where crises are routine and therefore almost inevitable. But this narrative masks the intricate web of interdependencies, energy flows, arms deals, diplomatic accords that make every flare-up both predictable and perilously fragile. Why have we accepted volatility as normal? Perhaps because acknowledging its cause forces a confrontation with uncomfortable truths about global reliance and the consequences of neglect. The mechanics of this tension are precise and unforgiving. Military posturing is synchronized with intelligence operations, while oil and gas contracts are leveraged as instruments of influence. Strategic corridors, pipelines, and port access are monitored and manipulated to ensure economic leverage. Sanctions are not merely punitive. They are tools to redirect power, designed to apply pressure while avoiding open conflict. Behind the scenes, financial flows are tracked with meticulous care. State-backed banks and multinational trading houses adjust holdings instantly, hedging against instability that could ripple across global markets. Every movement is calculated, every declaration measured. Yet the human element introduces uncertainty, a variable no policy paper can fully contain. The winners in this theater are states and corporations capable of navigating complex regional allegiances, exploiting fractures to strengthen influence, and controlling key resources that the world cannot function without. The losers, by contrast, are the millions whose daily lives depend on stability. A small shop owner in Beirut whose supply chain is disrupted by sudden border closures, a family in Baghdad paying twice the normal price for fuel, an employee in Dubai facing layoffs as regional investors pull back. Can the people who shoulder these consequences ever truly influence the decisions that shape them? Obstacles remain ever present. Proxy conflicts, ideological rivalries, and miscalculated responses could escalate tensions into open confrontation. One unanticipated strike or misinterpreted signal could unravel months of diplomacy, threatening both local livelihoods and international markets. On the ground, the effect is intimate and immediate. Parents adjusting household budgets to cope with inflation driven by distant policies, a hospital delaying critical equipment deliveries because sanctions slow shipping, a student questioning whether their career path is viable amid economic uncertainty. Globally, the repercussions are vast. European energy dependence forces new partnerships and infrastructure projects. Asian importers hedge against price shocks. The U.S. and other powers reconsider military commitments and supply agreements. Localized tension translates into global volatility, a reminder that no border is truly isolated and no citizen unaffected. The moral imperative is clear. Governance cannot be abstract. Citizens deserve leaders who prioritize stability over spectacle, foresight over short-term gain, and humanity over political expediency. The Middle East is more than a region in turmoil. It is a mirror reflecting the cost of decisions made in distant capitals on ordinary lives. And in that reflection, society must ask itself a fundamental question. When power and profit collide with human need, whose interests truly prevail? What often goes unnoticed in these crises is the actor no one expects, the player whose move changes the trajectory entirely. In Greenland, it is not the U.S. alone, but a coalition of corporate traders, Arctic research institutes, and even indigenous councils, quietly asserting influence over resource flows, challenging assumptions that national power is absolute. In Ukraine, it is not merely diplomats or generals, but financial institutions whose willingness to underwrite reconstruction, or conversely freeze assets, becomes the linchpin of negotiations. And in the Middle East, a single state's recalibration of energy exports, or an unannounced military maneuver, can ripple through markets faster than any headline could capture. These actors operate in the shadows of public awareness, but their choices redefine strategy. The turning points they create are not accidents. They are deliberate, executed through legal, financial, and technical precision. In Greenland, tariffs are paired with export licenses and monitoring frameworks that enforce compliance while keeping global competitors off balance. In Ukraine, conditional loans and insurance guarantees act as invisible scaffolds, ensure that concessions are not merely symbolic but enforceable, while providing leverage to shape long-term outcomes. In the Middle East, the real power lies in controlling supply routes and financial flows, where sanctions, incentives, and secret agreements intersect to dictate who prospers and who struggles. These mechanisms are abstract, often incomprehensible to the general public, yet they manifest concretely in every price tag, in every job market fluctuation, and in every security calculation. The winners in this evolving landscape are those who can navigate complexity, who anticipate moves before they occur, and who possess the foresight to leverage both law and market psychology. The losers are those left exposed. The small business owner caught between tariff increases and supply delays, the Ukrainian family relying on foreign aid that arrives inconsistently, the citizen in the Middle East whose cost of living spikes overnight because decisions were made far from their neighborhood. How much of this is destiny, and how much is design? Yet these turning points carry risk. Unexpected obstacles, legal challenges, political upheaval, environmental activism, can derail even the most meticulous strategies. Every calculated advantage has its counterweight. Every move its unintended consequence. The tension is palpable, and the stakes are deeply human. Picture a young engineer in Europe recalibrating a production schedule because a Greenland mine shipment is delayed, or a teacher in Kiev rationing heating because energy costs have doubled overnight. These are not abstract theories. They are daily realities shaped by unseen power plays. Globally, the implications are immense. Supply chains are rerouted, alliances reconsidered, and markets recalibrate with every subtle shift. A decision in Nuuk or Kiev or Abu Dhabi can influence commodity prices in New York, employment rates in Berlin, and geopolitical strategy in Beijing. Power, it becomes clear, is both local and global simultaneously. The lesson is moral as much as strategic. Citizens deserve transparency and foresight. Leaders accountable not only for immediate advantage, but for the long-term consequences of their choices. Strategic brilliance cannot be an excuse for disregard of human cost. In these turning points, in the quiet recalibrations that determine winners and losers, society is reminded that the exercise of power carries an ethical weight that cannot be ignored. The question we must ask is not just who wins, but who is protected when the stakes are this high. Amid all the strategic maneuvers, the legal scaffolding and the shifting alliances, the consequences on ordinary lives are undeniable, immediate, and often brutal. While policymakers debate tariffs, sanctions, and guarantees in conference rooms, citizens feel the ripples in the simplest, most personal ways. In the cost of groceries, the price of heating, the reliability of public transportation, or the hours they must work to make ends meet. A small business owner in Minnesota recalculates her supply orders because rare earth metals from Greenland have spiked in cost. She wonders whether she can afford to keep her employees, or some jobs will vanish quietly, leaving families vulnerable. A Ukrainian family in Kharkiv waits anxiously for electricity and fuel, knowing that negotiations in distant capitals will determine whether they can stay warm this winter or whether their children will go to school safely. In the Middle East, the tension over oil exports and regional rivalries translates directly into skyrocketing prices at gas stations thousands of miles away. A taxi driver in Cairo finds his daily costs climbing, cutting into wages already strained by economic instability. A young engineer in Germany must delay production of precision equipment because tariffs and sanctions make sourcing critical materials impossible on schedule. These scenarios, while geographically dispersed, share the same pattern. Global decisions made far from local lives manifest in tangible hardship. The abstraction of policy gives way to the concreteness of survival. And it is not just economics. Security, opportunity, and social stability are affected as well. Families postpone dreams, educational programs are curtailed, and communities bear the invisible weight of decisions over which they have little control. How long can society tolerate invisible hands, shaping the conditions of everyday life without accountability? How many ordinary people must absorb the cost of strategic chess played in distant rooms before citizens demand clarity and justice? Yet there is a lesson embedded here that cannot be ignored. Human resilience adapts, innovates, and endures, but it is not limitless. The same decisions that empower nations and corporations to manipulate markets can also destabilize the very social contract that sustains them. One miscalculated tariff, one delayed agreement, one sudden spike in energy costs is not just an economic blip. It is a disruption in the lived reality of millions. Ordinary citizens experience these ripples in real time. An increase in grocery bills, a paused business project, a family forced to make difficult choices. Each is a reminder that strategy and human consequence are inseparable. Globally, the stakes remain intertwined. Local hardships accumulate into systemic pressures. Trade partners recalibrate, investors hedge, governments reassess policies, and international tensions heighten. The world is a network of cause and effect, where the abstract rules of economics, diplomacy, and law converge in the daily lives of ordinary people. In this convergence lies a moral imperative. Governance must not be an exercise in detached calculation. Citizens deserve transparency, protection, and foresight. Decisions that ripple through Greenland, Ukraine, and the Middle East are ultimately decisions about human lives. Leadership without accountability is a luxury society can no longer afford. The reverberations of these crises extend far beyond the immediate theaters of action, shaping global geopolitics in ways that few headlines capture. Greenland, Ukraine, and the Middle East are not isolated events. They are nodes in a tightly interconnected system where every decision triggers a cascade of consequences across continents. When tariffs restrict Greenland's rare earth exports, Asian technology manufacturers recalibrate production schedules, European energy policies are adjusted, and the U.S. leverages leverage over allies and competitors alike. Every shipment delayed, every license withheld, is a signal to the world. Power is not only wielded through armies and treaties, but also through the quiet manipulation of markets, contracts, and strategic resources. Ukraine demonstrates this principle even more starkly. Conditional loans, insurance guarantees, and financial sanctions ripple through global banks and investment portfolios. European economies hedge against exposure to regional instability, while Asian investors reconsider engagement in Eastern Europe. Even nations geographically distant, such as those in Latin America or Africa, face recalibrations of trade agreements, currency valuations, and resource imports. Conflict there is never truly local. It is a lever that shifts the balance of power globally. The challenge lies not in understanding mechanics. They are intricate but traceable, but in appreciating the human consequences embedded in these movements. A sudden spike in energy prices, a delayed export, a frozen asset account affects livelihoods, retirement plans, and industrial growth across borders. Can the global system continue to operate as if these human consequences are secondary? In the Middle East, the stakes compound. Oil and gas pipelines, military posturing, and financial networks are instruments not only of regional influence, but also of global stability. When a state restricts exports or adjusts production, stock markets fluctuate, currencies wobble, and economies thousands of miles away feel the strain. The world watches, not merely because of headline wars, but because each decision is a test of resilience in an interconnected system where no nation is insulated. How can societies plan, invest, or grow when distant conflicts define the parameters of their security and prosperity? The moral dimension emerges when we recognize that these ripples are not abstract. They are choices, orchestrated by actors whose calculus often excludes the daily realities of citizens. Leadership in such circumstances is measured not by tactical wins, but by foresight, ethical clarity, and the ability to mitigate human cost. Citizens deserve transparency, a voice in decisions that ultimately shape their livelihoods, and a guarantee that power will be exercised with accountability. The global chessboard may be complex, but its consequences are human, tangible, and immediate. Every ripple, every maneuver demands reflection. How do we ensure that strategy serves society rather than subordinates it? This is the imperative for governance in the modern era. Greenland, Ukraine, and the Middle East are case studies not merely of power, but of responsibility. They reveal that global strategy cannot be divorced from human consequence, and that the actions of states, corporations, and financial institutions must be scrutinized not just for effectiveness, but for justice. In this web of influence, transparency is not optional, it is essential. Citizens deserve nothing less than clarity, foresight, and protection from decisions made behind closed doors. As the lens pulls back from Greenland's frozen resources, Ukraine's fragile diplomacy, and the Middle East's simmering tensions, one truth emerges with stark clarity. Power without conscience is a danger not only to distant capitals, but to every household, every worker, and every family caught in its wake. The intricate mechanics of tariffs, financial guarantees, sanctions, and strategic maneuvering are impressive in their sophistication. Yet they are only half the story. The other half is profoundly human. The quiet suffering, the delayed ambitions, the anxiety over bills, jobs, and futures that ordinary citizens shoulder while elites calculate advantage. Can a society endure indefinitely when the human cost of strategy is hidden behind abstractions? Governance is not merely about winning geopolitical or economic contests. It is about foresight, accountability, and moral courage. Leaders who wield power over markets, resources, and security frameworks must recognize that their decisions resonate far beyond conference rooms and legislative chambers. A single choice in Greenland can reverberate through factories in Asia. A nuance in Ukraine's negotiations can determine the survival of families in Kiev. A policy adjustment in the Middle East can push global energy prices into volatility, reshaping the daily lives of millions. Citizens are not collateral in these contests. They are the measure by which true leadership must be judged. The philosophical lesson is inescapable. Stability, equity, and humanity are not optional components of strategy. They are its foundation. Economic leverage, legal frameworks, and military planning gain significance only when they serve the broader purpose of societal well-being. A tariff, a sanction, a diplomatic maneuver that enriches a few while imperiling the many is not evidence of strength. It is evidence of neglect. And yet, the story is not one of helplessness. Transparency, accountability, and informed public engagement can transform the calculus of power. When citizens demand clarity, question decisions, and insist on foresight, they elevate governance from the domain of intrigue to the domain of responsibility. The world is interconnected in ways that the media often fails to convey. Greenland, Ukraine, and the Middle East are not isolated issues. They are mirrors reflecting the consequences of choices made far from the people they affect. The moral imperative is simple, though often ignored. Power must be exercised with awareness of its human impact, and citizens must be empowered to demand that it is. In this light, strategy without ethics is hollow, and influence without accountability is dangerous. Ultimately, the challenge before society is profound yet clear. The citizen, the worker, the family, is entitled to governance that is transparent, fair, and conscientious. They deserve leaders who balance ambition with morality, foresight with empathy, and national interest with global responsibility. In Greenland, in Kiev, in the streets of Beirut or Cairo, the consequences of hidden decisions are lived daily. The question remains, will power continue to serve a few, or can it be harnessed for the many, guided by conscience, illuminated by transparency, and measured against the true test of governance, the well-being of humanity itself